Inside TikTok, Zhang Yiming's Voyage Through the Great Waves. Zhang Ziaojan, April 25, 2022, 03:18. That day, Zhang Yiming had just finished watching The Social Network, the Mark Zuckerberg biopic that influenced a generation of mobile internet entrepreneurs. He opened the Douban app and typed a brief review. The word that left the deepest impression on me in The Social Network was obsession. Just before the political storm that would force him to negotiate the sale of TikTok's U.S. business, ByteDance founder Zhang Yiming bought a painting of a wave. It was early 2020, and he was staying in the United States. The sudden political maelstrom left him working under intense pressure and sitting for long stretches, aggravating an old back condition. He was in physical pain. To many people, Zhang was a Chinese entrepreneur with little artistic sensibility and a strongly utilitarian streak. His purchase of a work of art, therefore, came as a surprise. People who know him say the painting grew out of his special affection for California. Over the previous 6 years, ByteDance had traveled a chaotic and difficult road toward globalization. TikTok's global monthly active users had now peaked above 1.2 billion, while its daily active users had overtaken Douyin's pace in China, where the latter remained above 600 million. In other words, every day, more than 1 billion people on Earth opened this Chinese entertainment and short video app on their phones. The meteoric rise of Douyin and TikTok multiplied ByteDance's valuation nearly 36-fold. More importantly, for the first time, a Chinese content platform had penetrated deep into the West and established a new model for Chinese companies doing business globally. The wave painting reflected not only Zhang Yiming's ambition to go abroad, but also the very real countercurrents of globalization he was being forced to confront. Chapter 1: Zhang Yiming's Unalloyed Personality. The launchpad for Zhang Yiming's global campaign was a squat building at number 48 Zhichun Road in Beijing's Haidian district, known internally as the AVIC building. At the beginning of 2016, employees followed senior management into the stocky, square, cream-colored structure, which stood only 2 stories high. It had once housed an aviation museum, and helicopters could land on its roof. Characteristically modest, Zhang sent an internal letter reminding everyone to appreciate one fact. We are one of the few companies located on Zhichun Road, right in the heart of the imperial capital. At the time, Zhang took an enthusiastic interest in administrative matters and was especially pleased with the building's 14-meter ceilings and spacious interior. He had developed strong views about offices. Many companies lose their vitality after moving into an impressive headquarters. Citing Sun Microsystems, Yahoo, and Evernote, he argued that surroundings change one's state of mind. A lavish and comfortable headquarters could not only kill innovation, but also encourage status competition. For example, executives at some companies had actually demanded private elevators. Extremely vulgar, he wrote. When the company first moved in, Zhang was the only person with a private office on the east side of the top floor. Employees often saw him entering or leaving the elevators in a t-shirt and jeans, head down, scrolling through his phone as he walked. At mealtimes, he would take the shared elevator to the basement cafeteria, endure his hunger, pick up a tray, and queue with everyone else for lunch. Near the center of the second floor, Chen Lin sat to the northwest and Zhang Nan to the south. They served as the CEO's left and right arms. ByteDance's business was simple then, with only 2 product lines, Toutiao, led by Chen Lin, and interactive entertainment, led by Zhang Nan. Nihan Duanzi and Huishan short video were still being incubated, and Douyin had not yet been born. Zhang Lidong held court on the first floor. He was the second person to earn the privilege of a private office, albeit a small one converted from a storage room. Employees called him the second boss. His responsibility was to make money and build a sturdy financial pillar for the company. In 2016, many people saw the company known as Toutiao as little more than a news aggregator built on low-quality content, scraped third-party information, and algorithmic feeds. Worse still, The mobile news market was already a red ocean within a red ocean. Zhang Yiming, a former software engineer, is under 1.7 meters tall, with small eyes and glasses. He smiled at everyone and tended to swallow his words when speaking. Many cast him as the personification of data-driven, machine-like rationality. That description captures his technological purism, but overlooks the human side of how he dealt with people. Gentle and cultivated, he appeared sincere, innocent, and harmless. Yet the purity of his personality also expressed itself as a kind of high emotional intelligence. People close to him told me that Zhang was skilled at understanding human nature, quickly conveying goodwill, and making sure the other person felt it. People who met him usually thought he was a decent young man and were very willing to help him. Back in 2014, Toutiao faced a public relations crisis. Zhang personally visited media organizations to communicate. Someone close to the affair recalled that a respected veteran journalist initially met the controversial tech upstart in a state of considerable anger. But in the latter half of their conversation, the situation underwent an astonishing reversal. The veteran began considering the problem from Zhang's point of view. On the other hand, Zhang was not sentimental. He was exceedingly exacting about both people and matters, intolerant of gray areas or even a grain of sand in the machinery. That could give him a ruthless edge. In ByteDance's early days, he sent a person who had taken the company's code to prison. Chapter 2: The Hidden Thread. For this founder of unusually pure character, Facebook, the global king of social media, was an idol, an enemy, and, above all, an object of imitation. Facebook's silhouette would accompany ByteDance throughout its later journey overseas. Zhang once instructed employees to explore social products, one of which was called Feilao. A product manager told me that at Feilao business meetings, Zhang repeatedly said things like, "We could build Facebook. Why don't we build a Facebook? Why shouldn't we learn from Facebook?" The product manager recalled, "The thing I heard him mention most often was Facebook." One thing is certain, Yiming liked Facebook, perhaps even envied it. Before ByteDance had firmly established itself at home, Zhang was already looking abroad. In fact, TikTok's rise several years later was merely the visible strand of ByteDance's internationalization. The hidden strand had been laid as early as 2015-2016. The company incubated Newsmaster, an overseas version of Toutiao that was later renamed Top Buzz, and then launched Buzz Video, an overseas version of Zigua Video. The impulse to expand internationally can be traced to expectations that Toutiao's growth would plateau. Zhang Yiming is, famously, an uncompromising believer in data. An early member of the international team told me the company had made the following estimate. The total daily active user market for news feeds in China could reach 240 million. If the winner took half the market, the ceiling would be roughly 120 million DAUs. Zhang immediately detected the danger hidden inside the numbers. Reality bore out the forecast. Toutiao exploded in every direction in 2016, reaching 30 million DAUs by mid-year and breaking through 100 million during the 2017 Lunar New Year. But after that brief miracle, it entered a long period of fatigue. DAUs peaked at 120 million and have since slipped to around 100 million. When growth comes under pressure, one path is to look for opportunities in international markets. For its first overseas markets, Toutiao chose the United States, Japan, and Latin America. I asked Zhang Yiming directly, a former ByteDance middle manager said. At the time, Chinese companies expanding internationally all went to Asian and African countries, but Toutiao chose the United States and Japan. Zhang said conditions in Asia and Africa were too poor. Even if you became very large, the volume would still be too small, and there was no time to wait for those markets to grow. The United States and Japan were difficult, but even a slice of either would be substantial. So we should target first-world countries, whichever markets were biggest. Determining which market is biggest is itself a discipline. Zhang did not look only at DAUs. He asked subordinates to calculate DAU multiplied by ARPU, average revenue per user. In other words, total daily users multiplied by the amount that could be earned from each one, yielding the maximum commercial value that could be extracted from a market. Zhang seemed never to impose mental limits on himself. Yiming believed challenging Facebook and Google was something that should be achievable, another regional head overseas told me. For him, the task was to gain a foothold and then kick the giants over. Zhang would tell employees, "We must capture this market, and if we want to become big, we need to." Zhang once offered a serious internal analysis. Facebook attacks from the top down, we attack from the bottom up. Facebook, he explained, was a social product. Whoever stood at the center of a social network influenced the people around them. That was top-down. ByteDance was an algorithmic recommendation product. Its algorithm advanced together with the masses. As long as more people used the app because of the algorithm, ByteDance could hold its ground, strengthen and enlarge its position, and ultimately encircle Facebook. That was bottom-up. At the end of that year, ByteDance set its strategy for 2017. It had only two P0, highest priority, initiatives: interactive entertainment and internationalization. Over the next 3 years, people marveled at the explosive rise of Douyin within the interactive entertainment line, while overlooking another fact: ByteDance's globalization never stopped. That allowed it to seize both a second and a third growth curve. Chapter 3: It failed. Every other Sunday, Zhang Yiming would leave his office on the east side of the second floor, enter a conference room, and take his usual seat. Throughout 2017, he attended the internationalization bi-weekly meeting on time. Attendance remained around 20, limited to middle management and above. Most of the time, he stroked the touchscreen of his Surface computer, listening and typing without speaking. A middle manager who attended recalled that of the few words Zhang ever left behind in those meetings, only one sentence still echoed in his mind. Zhang said, "Moving fast is what matters most." Before long, however, they discovered trouble arriving from every direction. ByteDance's first head of international operations was Zhou Jingjin, a top science track student from a county-level city in Zhejiang whom Zhang had recruited early. Chinese internet companies subscribed to the idea that newcomers should run established businesses, while veterans should build new ones. Zhou volunteered to lead the international operation. Copyright was the first mountain. Protection was extremely strict in the United States and Japan, so ByteDance could not rely on its domestic practice of simply scraping content. An industry insider said there were generally two coping strategies in the market. When the copyright owner was obviously formidable, Disney, for example, the company used a red flag mechanism and properly licensed the material. When the owner appeared weak and unlikely to sue at every turn, it used a safe harbor mechanism: repost the content through disguised accounts and shield the platform from liability. But both judgments depended entirely on guesswork. Mistakes were common, and ByteDance became entangled in lawsuits early on. Zhang realized that overseas expansion required an experienced and seasoned international operator. In mid-2016, he recruited Liu Xinhua to take charge, with Zhou Jingjin reporting to him. Liu had been CMO of Cheetah Mobile and had already achieved both professional renown and financial independence. Zhang granted this second-generation leader extensive authority. From his very first day, Liu was accorded the status of a business unit chief. The Internationalization Business Unit was ByteDance's first BU. It was abbreviated I-18N, from internationalization, with I and N as the first and last letters and 18 letters between them. It enjoyed autonomous powers unprecedented in ByteDance's history and not repeated for years afterward. Unexpectedly, however, in a company then organized around centralized functional platforms, the BU structure became a major constraint. After taking office, Liu quickly pushed 4 initiatives. He built an overseas organizational structure, established local operations, and reduced the impact of copyright disputes. In addition, he led the renaming of Newsmaster, Toutiao's overseas version. Research had found that U.S. users of news products were mostly over 45. To make the product younger, the company needed to soften its association with hard news and position it as light information. In American slang, buzz describes something generating chatter on social media and can refer to news or gossip. Top Buzz meant the best of that buzz. After the rename, Top Buzz shifted from professionally generated content toward a user-generated creator economy, aspiring to become an upgraded version of the American blogging platform Medium. An operations director for the product believed growth was what ultimately trapped news apps in developed countries. He told me that mobile internet user acquisition and monetization operated very differently in China and abroad. In China, phones offered a large pre-installation market, exposure channels were abundant, and overall prices were reasonable. Overseas, both user growth and monetization were monopolized by two giants, Facebook and Google. The project was competing with them. Users came through those two channels, and monetization also came through those two channels. The growth model was a closed loop with no way out. He ran the numbers for me. In China, Toutiao could arrange pre-installation with phone manufacturers. A user generated RMB 0.3 per day and RMB 15 over a 50-day lifetime, while pre-installation cost only RMB 5, leaving a profit. Lifetime meant the number of days after getting a new phone before a user uninstalled the app. Overseas, the figures diverged dramatically. In the United States, acquiring one user cost $3, but that user generated only about $1 over a 30-day lifetime. You can't earn the money back. In effect, you are paying them a tax, the operations executive concluded. Overseas, if you want to build a content or social product, Facebook is the ceiling. It is a gigantic maw. ByteDance spent 2017 in a state of anxiety because it lacked a new, compelling story. In July, the strategy department prepared a report for Zhang Yiming. It showed little hope for the globalization of news products and called urgently for a transformation. Zhang, however, could not accept retreat. Yiming firmly believed that overwhelming force could produce a miracle, an employee in the international BU said. In Zhang's mind, if the model had been proven in China, it should be able to go global. The project struggled on for another year. Liu Xinhua, meanwhile, believed the era of text and images had passed. His interest waned, and he shifted his energy toward video. According to someone close to senior management, Liu visited Japan, found its news market dominated by strong products with almost no room for entry, and abandoned text in favor of buzz video, which saw decent early growth. Short video gave him a taste of success. But the disadvantages of the BU as an independent kingdom became increasingly apparent. Obtaining resources from the centralized platforms was difficult. Liu's desire to pursue video also failed to match Zhang's expectations, and someone else at ByteDance already controlled the video field. For a combination of reasons involving cultural integration and product direction, Liu left after only a year and joined Kyushu. At a project review meeting in 2018, the most powerful figures sat around a square table, with middle managers seated behind them. Zhang Lidong, who controlled the source of the company's money, normally carried considerable weight. A former journalist who had risen to vice president of the Beijing Times, he was more emotional than Zhang Yiming but had seasoned judgment and acted decisively. A participant recounted that on that day, Zhang Lidong suddenly spoke in his hoarse voice. "We should stop this project. It isn't making any money." The room instantly fell silent. No one dared speak. "This project still has a future. We can watch it a little longer," Zhang Yiming replied. After Liu left, the international BU fell apart. Product and operations were taken over by Chen Lin and Zhao Tian, their counterparts at Toutiao, while algorithm and engineering staff returned to their respective centralized platforms. Later, Kang Zeu joined ByteDance from Baidu and took over international products. He incubated Hello, a social product for India. It was not until August 2018 that the company finally decided to shut down its international news initiative. Burdened by an outdated product format, copyright problems, and insurmountable growth economics, Top Buzz came to a brutal end. ByteDance's first business unit passed into history. Its sole tangible fruit, Hello, would later fail to escape a ban by the Indian government. Within Zhang Nan's line, Nihanduanzi and Huashan short video also attempted to expand overseas. They failed as well. No one had ever seen anger spread across Zhang Yiming's face. He seemed insulated from emotion. But the participant quoted above heard him say, "I don't really feel angry. The strongest negative emotion I feel toward a person is disappointment." Chapter 4: Black Tea and White Tea. Zhang Yiming, a pragmatic man who cared about return on investment, would not agonize over the symbolism of a name. If the data went up, that was good enough. The Chinese name Douyin emerged from a combination of A/B testing and a fortune teller's advice. TikTok, however, was called TikTok because Zhang personally made the final decision. A key participant in TikTok's early days told me the team generated many English names and A/B tested them, yet failed to settle on one. TikTok was nearly eliminated from a long list of cool English words. The name came from TikTok, a Western pop song released in 2009. Its title echoed the sound tick-tock and portrayed an all-out night of clubbing. The team hesitated because, although the song had been a hit, it resembled a catchy but disposable pop tune and felt vulgar in American culture. One of the name's few advantages was that it was easy to pronounce. Chance also played a part. At the beginning of its short video expansion abroad, ByteDance had shifted its focus toward Japan and South Korea. In both countries, TikTok was not only easy to say, but also sounded playful. Yiming felt that this was the one. The early team thought that, in the absence of anything better, they could use it for the moment and change it whenever they wanted. No one expected this meaningless onomatopoeia to prove so contagious. People everywhere in the world, speaking every language, can pronounce it, and they all pronounce it the same way. It ultimately swept the globe. For content apps, ByteDance's decisive weapon was its recommendation algorithm. The company often found a product shell, poured its battle-tested algorithm into it, and reinforced it with systems for user growth and monetization. As I explained in Inside Douyin, The Birth of the Time Furnace, ByteDance historically supported recommendation, user growth, and monetization through centralized platforms. All three capabilities were validated and accumulated through Toutiao. But had the company stopped there, it would have remained just another news app. Musical, Lie arrived at exactly the right time. It gave ByteDance a second product body and an enormous supply of content fuel. Fused with ByteDance's algorithms, it displayed extraordinary vitality. Yet on the eve of their successful union, both companies had entered a period of struggle. The music short video app Musical, Lie was born in Shanghai. Its two founders were almost the inverse of Zhang Yiming, emotional, fluent in English, and deeply artistic. Yang Luyu, known as Louis, wore his hair in small curls, loved cycling, and had an earring in one ear. Zhu Jun, known as Alex, wore long gray-white hair and looked like a Taoist priest. The pair resembled artists of the internet world. They possessed sharp product insight, but lacked strong algorithms and advanced technical R&D capabilities. Musical, Lie's origin story was a game of happy accidents. It is difficult to imagine that these two artists once worked together at Ebao Tech, an enterprise software company serving the insurance industry. B2B software then occupied the bottom of the tech world's hierarchy of glamour. Naturally, at the starting line, entertainment was nowhere in their minds. They planned to build an education company. Yang Luyu initiated and effectively controlled the venture. He believed short video offered an opportunity, and that education was the way in. Zhu Jun was then in the United States, having moved to the enterprise software provider SAP to study the future of education. During a visit home to Shanghai, Yang persuaded him to join. Before long, Zhu became a co-founder, and the pair began exploring a video community called Zhiliao, where people could teach and learn from one another. But educational video was too difficult to produce. The venture stumbled, burned through half its financing, and saw little hope. Circumstances forced a pivot toward entertainment. By then, the founders had developed some understanding of community products. They believed a great community is a collection of attitudes toward life and a tool for self-expression. They came up with a new idea: encourage young people to live like music. In 2012, they launched the app under a stiff Chinese name, Unalloyed. That marked the beginning of their second failure. At the time, 4G had not yet become widespread. Kyushu, founded during the same period, endured a long domestic wait. Yang and Zhu, both experienced in international work, chose a different route. They would try their luck in countries with strong Wi-Fi coverage. At that point, only the United States and South Korea offered public Wi-Fi on a broad scale. After 2 domestic setbacks and 2 bouts of despair, they chose the United States as the next stop for their startup. This time, Providence seemed to help with the name. Someone familiar with musical, Lai told me the founders wanted an adverb that expressed an attitude toward life. The Lai was inspired by the initials of Luyu's pinyin name, conveying the phrase live music, Lai. The music domain had already been registered, so they compromised on musical. By further coincidence, Lai is Libya's country code domain, and the Libyan war that year had made it available at an unusually low price. Yang and Zhu's declines suddenly reversed. Launched in 2014, musical, Lai won a following among American teenagers. In just 2 years, it reached 20 million monthly active users and 5 million daily active users in the United States. Musical, Lai became known as a toy for white kids. Then came a new set of problems. By 2016-2017, musical, Lai had saturated the American teenage market, and growth remained flat for an entire year. The predicament had 2 dimensions. First, the brand had become stereotyped in Europe and the United States as an app for teenagers, making it difficult to expand into other age groups. Second, when the company returned to China and aggressively promoted its Chinese version, Muse, it missed the best window. Local brands Kyushu and Douyin were already eating into the market. Musical, Lai's weak algorithmic foundation was particularly troublesome and left it poorly equipped for the commercial battle at home. Under pressure from stalled growth, musical, Lai began to consider a sale. ByteDance was not musical, Lai's first choice. In the third quarter of 2016, the 2 founders flew to Facebook's headquarters in California to meet Mark Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg was a credible buyer. He had paid $1 billion for Instagram when it had a team of 20, and with Facebook's support, Instagram had grown into a giant photo-sharing community. Zuckerberg was interested in capturing the teenage market. In his eyes, musical, Lai was Instagram for video. He sent Instagram founder Kevin Systrom to Shanghai several times to discuss an acquisition with musical, Lai's core team. A participant in the transaction told me Systrom made at least 3 trips. Facebook ultimately made a verbal all-cash offer of $1.6 billion. But late in the negotiations, uncertain about the ultimate ceiling for short video, Facebook began to waver. The second suitor was Kyushu, China's short video pioneer. Short of cash, Kyushu proposed an investment structure designed to demonstrate the greatest possible sincerity. Musical, Lai would retain its independence and become a Kyushu subsidiary, with Kyushu holding more than 40%. ByteDance entered only at the end. It was then urgently searching for a short video opportunity and had incubated Huashen's short video and Douyin. Senior executives, Zhang Yiming included, preferred Huashen. They could not resist the lure of data. Kyushu was growing impressively, while musical, Lai had made little impact in China. Executives continued to wonder whether musical, Lai simply could not work there. As a result, Douyin, which copied musical, Lai down to the pixel, also endured a long period of obscurity at its inception, ignored inside the company. For the story of Douyin's creation, see my previous article, Inside Douyin, The Birth of the Time Furnace. The intriguing turning point came in May 2017. Douyin had just exceeded 1 million daily active users, showing its first signs of growth. Zhang was still far from anticipating that it would someday overwhelm Kyushu, but he immediately abandoned his earlier indifference and approached musical, Lai's founding team. He told us at the time, "We have already passed 1 million DAUs and will soon be heading for 5 million, a core musical, Lai member recalled. Zhang wanted a ceasefire and hoped musical, Lai would agree to sell to ByteDance. Musical, Lai's founders laid down 3 conditions. 1. Rename musical, Lie to change users' perception of it as a teenage app. 2. Integrate ByteDance's algorithms. And 3. Spend at least $1 billion on marketing. Zhang agreed to all three. According to someone close to the deal, his offer was lower than Facebook's, only $1 billion, but could be paid in a combination of cash and shares. Based on ByteDance's $22 billion valuation at the time, that equity would now have multiplied almost 20-fold. Recent reports put ByteDance's valuation at $400 billion. That same May, a month that would reshape the global short video landscape, the Douyin team impatiently launched TikTok in South Korea and Japan. It borrowed some staff who had previously worked on video projects in Japan for the international BU. ByteDance then had little influence. The overseas group consisted of passionate but inexperienced young people, and even recruiting was difficult. TikTok and Douyin shared the same head of product, Ren Lifeng, nicknamed Huan, who reported to Zhang Nan. They chose a differentiated strategy, fight around North America. They focused on cultivating Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asia, India, and Brazil. East Asia became TikTok's zone of advantage, yet none of these regions mattered as much as the United States. For a content product, America was the high ground. Whoever wins America wins the world. A member of TikTok's founding team said musical Lie was essential both to ByteDance's short video strategy and to its globalization strategy. We had to buy it. In November 2017, after 6 months of repeated negotiations, musical, Lie and TikTok joined forces. Even the people involved could not have known that this would become one of the most successful acquisitions in the history of the Chinese internet. Their combined power exceeded everyone's imagination. Compared with Baidu's $1.9 billion acquisition of 91 Wireless, the deal was an extraordinary bargain for ByteDance. The relationship between musical, Lie and TikTok also left behind its own lore. Someone familiar with TikTok said musical, Lie's icon was predominantly white while TikTok's had a black background. One became white tea, the other black tea. White tea targeted Europe and the United States, while black tea targeted East Asia. A story later circulated inside the company that the two products had deliberately divided the world between them. Some later employees thought this might also have been a negotiating tactic by Zhang, an emotional assurance to musical, Lie that we are not coming to seize your territory. The original core teams on both sides dismissed that sentimental account. The TikTok team said East Asia had been chosen for purely strategic reasons. Yiming wouldn't do anything that stupid. The musical, Lie team said the teams had not yet integrated and felt as if they were racing against each other. The black and white forces were in direct competition. Zhang used documents and meetings to align information across the organization. Wary of corporate spies, he deliberately inserted code words into internal documents to obstruct the spread of information. According to the source quoted above, white tea's code was 1233. Black tea, S was 1180. Chapter 5, Facebook's Complacency. 4 large, black Chinese characters reading Toutiao once hung on the upper left side of the AVIC building. In mid-2018, the company took them down and replaced them with a new blue sign resembling Facebook's colors, ByteDance. That year, Douyin took off, exceeding 200 million daily active users and overtaking Qiushu. The company had entered a new era. It would now fight Facebook for territory in the same ocean. During the 9 months after the acquisition, ByteDance absorbed musical, Lie's team of more than 400 people while integrating its algorithms into the product. Growth restarted from its plateau, though not immediately. Zhang simultaneously began the promised renaming process. Musical, Lie's team offered one alternative, preserve the Lie tradition and rename the app video, Lie, but A/B tests showed it underperforming TikTok. The overseas version of Douyin was therefore unified under the TikTok name. In August 2018, ByteDance announced with great fanfare that musical, Lie and TikTok would be fully integrated. Renaming was a decision that required concentrated resolve. A huge user base already knew musical, Lie. Forced integration would not only lose users in the short term, but also consume substantial cash rebuilding the brand, potentially sacrificing both the product and the money. A former member of Diddy's international team said that after Diddy acquired Brazilian ride-hailing company 99, it spent some time debating whether to unify the names. For a complex combination of reasons, it ultimately chose not to. Diddy's decision stood in contrast to ByteDance's. In Zhang Yiming's eyes, across the global map, TikTok had always been one ByteDance and one unified game. The integration involved careful details. Black tea and white tea did not initially merge their app packages. ByteDance replaced Musical Lie's icon with TikTok's while retaining a Musical Lie badge and changed the title to TikTok, including Musical Lie. The transition lasted more than half a year. Only after the new brand identity had formed did the company remove, including Musical Lie. It later discovered that white tea performed better overall than black tea and replaced every app with white tea's package. This shows that the TikTok we see today evolved from the fusion of ByteDance's algorithms with Musical Lie's product package, taking the strengths of each. Next came a dazzling carnival of money. Commercial wars driven by cash had long been commonplace in China's brutal internet industry. With ByteDance, a habitual maker of storms, launching this one, there was even less cause for surprise. Only this time, it carried the conflagration overseas. In a dramatic twist, for a while Facebook did not obstruct TikTok at all. It treated TikTok as one of its most valued customers. Once the integration was complete, TikTok gave the command to spend, and spend madly. Its most important advertising channel was, naturally, its old nemesis Facebook. From the third and fourth quarters of 2018 through the first quarter of 2019, TikTok's promotional budget grew more than 100% every quarter. Someone close to Facebook told me. Facebook generated around $5 billion a year in Greater China, and TikTok planned at that point to contribute about $1 billion over 3 years. The entire industrial chain was swept into the dance of money. Facebook's head of sales for Asia-Pacific was Chinese. Thanks to TikTok, he was crowned the company's top salesperson worldwide that year. At the end of 2018, Facebook awarded him an exceptional bonus, possibly in the millions. Colleagues in Singapore and Hong Kong all said he had stepped in dog shit. He was unbelievably lucky. At this point, Facebook still felt no alarm. The reason Facebook lowered its guard was simple. TikTok's retention was terrible. Is this company stupid? Almost all the users it buys disappear. Next-day retention is 30%. The internal view at Facebook was, I send it traffic, but it can't retain those users anyway, so it poses no threat, the source said. In early 2019, Liu Zhen, then ByteDance's senior vice president overseeing international functions, brought a team to Facebook and signed an annual strategic cooperation agreement with its Greater China leadership. In fact, buying users on Facebook offered terrible value. In the United States, acquiring a single user cost an astonishing $10. But ByteDance, a company skilled at arithmetic, quietly upgraded its strategy. Someone close to the company said it stopped obsessing over how long it would take to recover the acquisition cost and instead watched ARPU, simply put, how much money a daily active user could generate. This is where the cunning of commercial warfare appeared. ByteDance did not invent its target out of thin air. It fixed its gaze directly on Facebook. The company paid heavily to poach a group of Facebook managers, and some brought Facebook data with them. The figures were granular. Some had never appeared in financial reports, for example, how many daily users Facebook had in each country and how much revenue they generated. ByteDance used the data to create an elegant table covering more than 100 countries. It then cleverly treated Facebook's ARPU in each market as its target and worked backward to determine how much it should spend on distribution. Facebook overlooked a crucial distinction. Unlike social relationships, video content can cross borders. A short video made in the United States can be consumed in Europe, Japan, or Latin America, giving the product innate scalability. The app also aligned so perfectly with human nature that this added another layer of magic. A global product could also be deceptive. Data for any single country looked unremarkable, while ByteDance pursued a strategy of dispersing resistance and defeating markets one by one. When more than 100 countries were finally combined, the result was astonishing. TikTok and TopBuzz met radically different fates, partly because TikTok could grow organically. Moreover, the commercial jungle had already forged ByteDance into a shrewd operator. The company quickly understood that it needed to reduce its dependence on Facebook as fast as possible. In the first half of 2019, after completing a brilliant surprise attack, TikTok shifted its advertising front toward Google and Snapchat. ByteDance said this was meant to prevent Facebook from making sneaky moves behind the scenes, spying on data, secretly raising costs, or deliberately degrading targeting accuracy. Facebook's share of TikTok's media budget fell month by month, from 20% to less than 10%. Google, Snapchat, Apple Search Ads, Twitter, and several local apps all ranked ahead of it. By the time Facebook awoke, it was already mid-2019. TikTok had exceeded 100 million daily active users worldwide. Facebook tried to block it with Lasso, a short video app launched in Mexico and the United States. Before long, however, a black swan event that would grip the entire world descended from the sky. Chapter 6, up 110 million in 2 months. Don't get carried away. We are pigs riding the wind. If TikTok were to crown a second soul of the company after Zhang Yiming, employees would vote without hesitation for Zhu Jun, the musical Lie co-founder generally known inside ByteDance by his English name, Alex. Zhu built his influence inside ByteDance slowly. He is a rare manager about whom I never heard employees express negative feelings. After the acquisition, the company repeatedly adjusted his role. At first, he reported to Zhang Yiming but remained peripheral. Zhang reportedly disliked his multinational corporation manner until he came to appreciate Zhu's product ability. Later, Zhu reported to Zhang Nan, who managed both Douyin and TikTok. In June 2019, Zhu briefly took over Douyin, nominally reporting to Zhang Nan while she continued to oversee international operations. Through all 3 stages, Zhang Yiming remained dissatisfied with TikTok. Then, in October 2019, the company reorganized again. Zhang Nan took charge of China, while Zhu assumed full control overseas and began reporting directly to Zhang Yiming. It marked a rise in Zhu's influence. TikTok entered a period of rapid development. Zhu was older than most ByteDance executives, born in the 1970s. Refined in bearing, with a goatee and distinctive English, he came from Anhui and worked in enterprise services after graduating from Zhejiang University. He was also a man of feeling who loved drinking and reciting poetry. In the office, he often wore a gray shawl over his shoulders, hair loose, wooden clogs on his feet. He looked like a spiritual practitioner. Stories about him circulated inside the company. I often ran into him on the Shanghai subway, a man who was already financially independent, an operations employee said. At ByteDance, you rarely saw someone with hair as gray as his. At the elevator, he would hold the door for female colleagues and let others go first. A kindly old man, one product manager called him. Most ByteDance employees were born in the 1990s, which made someone born in the 1970s an old man by company standards. Alex likes to drink. Before he became so busy, he would take us out for drinks. A middle manager said. Alex spent many years in the United States. When he arrived, he brought East and West together. Every 2 months, when Alex gave the review, listening to him was pure enjoyment. His English was exceptionally authentic, and he could explain Chinese culture in English. Wow, he was really wonderful. When Zhu took over, antagonism permeated relations between TikTok's Chinese and foreign employees. He proposed a mission, vision, and values. Employees said, Alex created a poetic expression, and foreigners really bought in. Alex put it this way, TikTok is commerce, a bridge and windows. Zhu arrived at exactly the right moment. He took the helm, united people, and steadied morale across the global fleet, and led everyone together into the darkness. At the beginning of 2020, TikTok had fewer than 250 million daily active users. Those aboard had no idea that a tremendous storm was gathering ahead. The coronavirus spread rapidly. A global pandemic erupted, and TikTok erupted with it. First, at the end of February, an overseas interview caused an uproar in ByteDance's senior management chat group. Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg said TikTok's growth worried her. Their numbers are growing faster than anything we've ever seen. TikTok felt not joy but intense fear. Zhu called an emergency meeting. Sandberg is already watching us. Then the pandemic swept rapidly across the world and injected TikTok with a catalyst. From March to April 2020, one 2-month cycle, TikTok added 110 million daily active users. A TikTok employee told me. It was outrageous. It was almost equivalent to putting the entire population of Japan on the same app in a single month. Yet the rapidly rising numbers made ByteDance's senior leadership increasingly anxious. One afternoon, Zhu created a group in ByteDance's enterprise collaboration app, Feishu, and added several key leaders. Someone close to management told me he asked, "What are the risks if we remove the Facebook SDK, the login interface?" The situation was urgent. He ordered everyone to evaluate it immediately. Their discussion ended at 1 p.m., and he wanted a response no later than close of business that day. The immediate question hanging over them was whether to remove Facebook login at once. Once connected to these interfaces, TikTok effectively allowed Facebook to plant observers inside the app. How many users logged in each day, how many shared content, Facebook could see it all. But disconnecting would damage TikTok's user experience. The interfaces were like feeding tubes. As expected, every department forecast a loss. Removing the Facebook interface would deprive TikTok of precise user profiles during acquisition, reducing the efficiency of both growth and monetization. Zhu asked them to quantify the damage to user experience. The teams jointly concluded it would be no more than 20%. Zhu gave the order, cut it immediately. In the end, TikTok took less than a week to remove every last Facebook login interface. It decisively pulled out the feeding tubes. The unease did not dissipate. At TikTok's bi-monthly review, Zhu warned managers, "Don't get carried away," and "We are pigs riding the wind." While Zhu tensely steered TikTok onto the great wave of globalization, his old musical Lai partner, Yang Luyu, moved to ByteDance's education division to continue pursuing his original dream. He led a team that developed the Dolly Smart Learning Lamp. He cut off his old curls and adopted a crew cut. The most important turning point in TikTok's development? An employee who had worked there for almost 2 years answered without hesitation, "The pandemic. That was when it shot into the sky." Chapter 7. Leave no opening, suppress them everywhere. Zhang Yiming, sitting in the easternmost office on the top floor, likewise regarded internationalization as close to his heart. At the beginning of 2020, he redistributed power within the company. He handed over China, appointing Zhang Lidong and Zhang Nan as chairman and CEO of the China business, respectively. Zhang himself moved up a level to become global CEO. The three Zhangs formed the center of power. One line in Zhang Yiming's bi-monthly OKRs read, "Leave no opening." Someone close to the center of power told me it was actually a code phrase. In full, "Leave no opening, suppress them everywhere." These 8 Chinese characters were the highest command that this taciturn and outwardly unaggressive boss issued to TikTok. Under that doctrine, TikTok followed 2 unwritten rules. In any region, if a competitor entered, TikTok had to advance and crush it. Whenever a rival ranked ahead of TikTok on an app chart, TikTok had to defeat it within a week, whatever the cost. Even if it meant killing 1,000 enemies at the cost of 800 of our own, no price was too high so long as TikTok remained undefeated. The user growth platform, UG, was the vanguard responsible for carrying out the supreme command. Its leader, Zhao Qi, held a doctorate in computer science from Peking University. Scholarly in appearance and wearing black-framed glasses, he had been co-CEO of the startup Chelil. That venture failed. But large companies are strange in this way. They sometimes show unusual favor to people with startup experience, even failed startup experience, and give them independent command. Perhaps it is the tragic aura they carry, the boldness required to oversee an entire operation, or simply the sincere words of someone who has seen the bottom of the business world. Whatever the reason, CEOs often recognize a kindred spirit in them. At ByteDance, colleagues call Zhao Qi the man who has spent more money than anyone else on the Chinese internet. Put simply, Zhao's UG platform spent money externally to acquire users and roll products into ever larger snowballs. Zhang Lidong's monetization platform then made the money back by selling the products. For TikTok at this stage, spending heavily on growth was the highest priority. Monetization was still premature. TikTok set out from China and stretched wantonly around the planet like the arms of an octopus, continually expanding its global map. It divided countries into 4 tiers, S, A, B, and C, in descending order of strategic priority. Just as Toutiao had done in its first attempt at internationalization, TikTok treated developed countries as the critical targets. Once a cultural product conquers a hub and radiates outward into surrounding regions, it gains the advantage of projecting culture from a higher plane. Douyin had followed the same logic in China, beginning with first and second-tier cities. Sources told me that developed countries such as the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and Japan consumed the great majority of TikTok's global acquisition budget. India received strategic investment because of its enormous scale. Latin America and Russia received funding because competitors, Kyushu and Licky, owned by JOYY, had gone there, and the doctrine of leave no opening required TikTok to follow. Russia had originally been a C market and was later promoted to B. The force of cultural projection was enormous. Southeast Asia sat downstream from Chinese culture. With only limited paid promotion, TikTok climbed to number 1 in Thailand's App Store and topped both the App Store and Google Play in Vietnam. It just surged up all at once. In the Middle East, TikTok advertised only in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The product spread organically to neighboring countries. TikTok never spent a cent in Iraq, for example. Yet during the pandemic, it surged to 6 million daily users there. Iraq had about 25 million mobile internet users, giving TikTok 24% daily penetration and as much as 40% monthly penetration. Everyone was stunned, the employee summarized. The biggest difference between TikTok and Kyushu or Licky was that TikTok captured the developed countries. It had a shared content pool. American content supplied the world, while Douyin content supplied East and Southeast Asia. The power was extraordinary. Kyushu's internationalization, by contrast, took many detours. A former employee said the company had used a so-called horse racing mechanism and adopted a bewildering array of names in different regions, Kwai, Snack Video, and Zin, which has since closed. Small teams sprouted everywhere like bamboo shoots and fought independently. Leaders rotated in and out. Q Guangyu, known as Tony, who had just announced his departure, came from Didi and represented the 5th wave of leadership. During his tenure, Q consolidated and focused the operation as much as possible. Kyushu also considered whether it should imitate TikTok and unify its name, but kept wavering and eventually set the idea aside. First, its cash reserves were not as deep as ByteDance's. Second, its content had less ability than TikTok's to radiate across regions. Today, it retains meaningful visibility only in Brazil. To explain TikTok's rise from country to country, we need to introduce a little commercial theory. TikTok generally passed through 4 stages. The most wonderful moment was the arrival of the inflection point. Stage 1 was the mindless deployment of resources. Douyin had already proven the extraordinary potential of the business story. Abroad, TikTok merely copied it, guided by the mantra, believe simply and persist foolishly. Stage 2 was construction of the content ecosystem. Operations teams recruited influencers from YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, and elsewhere. If a competitor spent $10,000, TikTok spent $20,000. Users stood at one end of the machine and content at the other. User growth continuously supplied new users. content operations continuously supplied creators. The two sides produced a chemical reaction, and the user experience spiraled upward. Stage 3 was the milestone. The inflection point arrived. ByteDance had an inflection point theory that placed special emphasis on DAU penetration. The greater daily penetration became, the stickier the product became. The retention rate that had once troubled TikTok and caused Facebook to misjudge it would then improve naturally. Experience suggested that a country reached the inflection point at 20 to 30% penetration. The inflection point was magical. Once it arrived, interpersonal sharing and organic growth became the main forces behind the app's popularity. The paid-to-organic acquisition ratio moved step by step from paid traffic dominating to organic traffic dominating. Globally, paid acquisition once contributed 70 to 80% of growth. It had since fallen to 20 to 30%, forming a natural, healthy state of growth. Stage 4 was brand building and monetization. The SABC tiers were not permanent. Every country could ride the elevator up or down at any time. The deciding factors were complicated. They included hard measures such as population, GDP per capita, internet penetration, and the ceiling of the digital advertising market, but soft factors were inseparable from the calculation. TikTok was a mirror reflecting each country's culture. Indonesia began in Tier B, but at one point moved straight to a because people in Southeast Asia had a strong desire for self-expression. TikTok's posting rate in Indonesia reached 10%, compared with less than 5% for Douyin in China and only 2 to 3% in Japan. East Asians are more reserved, said someone responsible for country strategy. South Korea began in A, dropped to C after daily user growth faltered, and later rose for a while to B. One employee thought this might be connected to Koreans being relatively resistant to outsiders. Look, Samsung and LG hold 85% of the Korean market. People there don't use Chinese products, and they don't use Apple either. Another factor was that South Korea simply has too many entertainment options. In this way, TikTok used tremendous speed and abundant capital to hammer out a moat. Someone close to strategy formulation told me that in the 3 years from 2018 through 2020, TikTok deployed its vast cash reserves mainly in 4 directions: around $5 billion on marketing, growth, and brand building, about $2 billion on content subsidies, roughly $1.52 billion on servers and bandwidth, and the remainder on personnel. Total investment was estimated at $10 billion, the equivalent of the valuations of 10 unicorn companies. The source believed that any platform attempting to build a defensive rival would have to spend at least 2 or 3 times the cost of getting users to migrate, $20–30 billion. Even for the largest giant, that would be an enormous sum, enough to make it furrow its brow and hesitate for some time. Zhang Yiming had the courage and resolve to spend this kind of money, but he also depended on Zhang Lidong, who had sat 1 floor below him in the AVIC building. Zhang Lidong was the company's cash-printing machine and god of wealth, filling its coffers through the monetization of Toutiao and Douyin. Chapter 8: A high-stakes political adventure. The joy of explosive growth was almost immediately submerged by a political storm. As early as 2016, the European Union had adopted the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. Outsiders described it as the strictest law of its kind in history, with astonishing maximum penalties: 4% of a company's global annual revenue, or €20 million. As soon as GDPR took effect, the relevant authorities targeted Facebook, which was fined €10 million in 2018. GDPR's passage and implementation drew global attention to personal privacy. Under increasingly strong regulation, the global data network began to fragment after a period of openness. As Western economic growth slowed and populism rose, local protectionism became widespread. TikTok now faced its first shot in a political investigation. At the end of 2019, then U.S. President Donald Trump challenged ByteDance on the grounds that its acquisition of Mooncakes had not been reported to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. Zhang Yiming remained in the United States for several months to respond. In fact, Zhang had recognized the direction of events in advance, before the political storm knocked at the door. To guard against data risks, TikTok had already begun an orderly process of localization overseas. A TikTok employee told me that in early 2019, ByteDance began assessing isolation risks internally and drawing up contingency plans. Formal localization began in the third quarter. The campaign involved far more than a technical switch. Moderation, operations, servers, engineering, and product staff all had to move through a complex process that lasted more than a year. The migration dealt severe blows to the employees involved. The first wave affected content moderators. A former ByteDance employee said a moderation team of more than 300 people was cut. Most were bilingual workers specializing in less commonly taught languages. Although they were allowed to transfer internally, the narrow nature of their work gave them little chance of success. In the first quarter of 2020, as the pandemic's shadow spread across the globe, TikTok began a second wave of migration aimed at operations staff. Their job was to find creators and shape the tone and style of content. Overnight, authority in many regions transferred from China to overseas teams. Europe's operations team was nearly dissolved, with employees either transferring or leaving. Only regions without geopolitical risk, such as Southeast Asia, were allowed to retain operations in China. Some of those who left had made major contributions. Two musical, Lie employees had taken charge of operations for Western and Central Europe after the merger. TikTok's European general manager, Rich Waterworth, ordered them to hand their work to the European team within a week. The two women felt terribly wronged. "We have worked so hard here for 3 or 4 years, and now you want us to hand everything over in 1 week and split off the whole team," said someone who knew them. Both later changed roles, one moving into gaming and the other into charitable initiatives. After the first 2 waves of localization were completed at high speed, the pandemic in the United States grew steadily worse. Around March 2020, Zhang Yiming, the president's office, and Liu Zhen took a chartered flight back to China. Zhang was by then a globally watched technology magnate whose every move could make headlines. He entered quarantine and was confined to a hotel, directing his storm-tossed company by video. Soon after returning, Zhang took a further step. In May, ByteDance made a high-profile global personnel announcement that shook the Chinese and American technology industries. Kevin Mayer became the first American to receive supreme authority at ByteDance, serving not only as COO but also as TikTok's CEO. The appointment took effect on June 1. Mayer had built his record at Disney. In the kingdom of Mickey Mouse, he led major acquisitions including Pixar and Marvel, and launched the streaming service Disney+, achieving an impressive series of victories. Zhang hoped Mayer's American identity and local influence would help ByteDance navigate the complex forces of U.S. politics. At the same time, localization entered its third stage, migration of servers. By then, the Trump administration appeared to regard TikTok as an obstacle to re-election, and the drums of the political storm beat faster. Someone who attended TikTok's bi-weekly meetings remembered Zhu Wenjie, who led algorithm engineering, saying, "Separating the algorithm code will take 2 months. Can it be done in 15 days? Zhang could not wait. The answer was yes. The fourth and final wave of migration targeted product and technical personnel. TikTok leaders, Zhu Wenjie among them, transferred to Singapore. The year 2020 was one of political setbacks for ByteDance. The pandemic simultaneously propelled TikTok forward at a furious pace and tore its organization apart. Before the crisis in the United States had subsided, India, another S-tier country, fell. In June, just after Mayer took office, the Indian government ordered TikTok banned. Within days, Mayer convened an all-hands meeting, the most hastily arranged company-wide meeting in ByteDance's history. In less than 5 minutes, he told everyone not to worry. The India team was communicating actively, and the situation was not yet beyond control. But he failed to keep that promise. In an ironic twist, India's second-ranked short video app was Quishu's Snack Video. After TikTok was banned, Snack Video surged, its daily active users breaking through 150 million. Its delight did not last. 5 months later, India banned it as well. Back at TikTok, the emergency deteriorated rapidly. In July 2020, senior U.S. officials said the government would ban TikTok. In August, Trump issued a 45-day ultimatum: divest the U.S. business or shut down. Zhang was forced to negotiate a sale. Potential buyers included Microsoft, Oracle, Walmart, other commercial giants, and ByteDance's American investors. Zhang outwardly participated in negotiations to split the business while privately holding to his conviction that the world must remain one unified game. Less than 3 months after taking office, Mayer abruptly resigned. Explanations varied inside the company. Some said his plan had been to join shareholders in selling TikTok's U.S. operation, which seemed consistent with his personal interests. Others said he simply lacked the capacity for the situation and had been frightened away. Vanessa Pappas, TikTok's general manager for North America, became interim CEO. During this period, 3 phrases were repeated from the top of the company to the bottom: geopolitics, U.S., China confrontation, and force majeure. In truth, 99.9% of employees had no idea what the company was experiencing, much less what would happen to them personally. Middle and senior managers who knew nothing reassured frontline staff who knew nothing. Do everything humanly possible, then accept fate. Zhu Jun, the internet poet, who had by then become ByteDance's head of strategy, delivered a speech. In this era of rising walls, TikTok's mission is to build bridges so that people around the world can connect with one another and enjoy happiness. The impassioned declaration inspired many. The confusing U.S. crisis ultimately eased after Trump lost the election. What was it like? I lay there without moving and felt that they would die, and then they really did, said a veteran industry observer who followed the affair closely. One wrong step could have wiped out the value of ByteDance's U.S. assets. By negotiating, Zhang objectively extended the timeline long enough to survive the election. After Joe Biden took office, he revoked the ban, allowing ByteDance to avoid disaster. The observer believed this ordeal was far more difficult than ByteDance's earlier experience escaping pursuit by the giants in China. It had once moved easily among the giants, courting each without joining any camp, and developed an ability to benefit from all sides. In the TikTok crisis, ByteDance occupied a much more passive position and faced a vastly more powerful opponent. It was like a piece of duckweed on the ocean. The source compared it to driving a car into Beijing's narrow hutongs. To everyone's surprise, it had made it through once. This time it drove in and came back out again. Governments differ in their regulation of data security. To avoid taking such a risk again, ByteDance established exceptionally strict isolation mechanisms. According to a legal professional familiar with the matter, the overarching principle for sensitive information, personal accounts, home addresses, social security cards, and purchase records was: Chinese data stays in China, overseas data stays overseas. TikTok established data centers in the United States, Europe, Singapore, and elsewhere. The destination for data from different parts of the world was determined first by law and then by geographic proximity. In the special case of the United States, for example, data would not cross the border even if another data center were geographically more efficient. It was an enormous project, said someone close to ByteDance's senior leadership. The company spent heavily to isolate data at multiple levels, encrypt it, and design highly complex verification mechanisms so that people with different permissions could support the work without being able to see the data. ByteDance also became the most thoroughly localized Chinese technology company. No Chinese internet company depends this heavily on local people, one employee said. Even centralized platforms that normally depended on headquarters had to localize. User growth, which held the keys to expansion, was difficult to recruit for overseas, yet the United States, United Kingdom, Japan, Brazil, and Germany all had growth strategy teams. For a time, some markets even had Chinese and local teams compete against one another. The purpose was not competition, but to replace training with a contest. Chinese employees would help local employees grow. This was the most painful part. Chinese teams built markets and accumulated operating methods, then personally recruited local teams and passed those skills on, knowing full well that the result could be the novice beating the master through a flurry of wild punches. Every day we worried whether it would happen to us, one participant said, but it was a gradual infiltration. Chinese employees complained. They work nowhere near as hard as Chinese people. Most work 9-6, 5 days a week. We do the things local staff won't do, and when they make a mess, we clean it up. The situation had reached the point where TikTok basically does not recruit in China unless it cannot find someone abroad. Globalization squeezed Chinese employees' opportunities. The sweeping localization campaign meant that a Chinese citizen who wanted to stay aboard ByteDance's international ship had roughly 3 choices. The first was to change their permanent location to Singapore, Los Angeles, or another overseas base, gaining access to local data. The second was to obtain a U.S. green card and access local data through a VPN, albeit with permission limits. The third was to move from a core department that handled data to an area that did not rely on it, and thereby move relatively far from the center of decision-making. After surviving the political adventure, they understood that localization was both correct and unavoidable, yet they remained the sorrowful people aboard the fleet. Before long, many of those sorrowful people disembarked. Chapter 9: A Fleet on the Great Wave. After narrowly escaping the political vice and recognizing that Mayer's appointment had been a mistake, Zhang Yiming thought further about the shape of his global fleet. Organizational design is a subtle craft. Every flash of light behind a pair of glasses reflects a measurement of human nature. After May 2021, TikTok's top leader was neither the Chinese Zhang Nan or Zhu Jun nor the Americans Mayer or Pappas. Zhang personally selected Xu Zaichu, a man who combined Chinese heritage, Singaporean citizenship, British and American education, and a handsome, approachable East Asian face, to serve as TikTok's general manager. Many employees told me the choice had been carefully weighed and represented, the result of balance in every dimension. He found a balance between the West and China. After arriving, Chu spoke at an all-hands meeting. His handsome appearance and elite background won people over. Employees watching remotely filled the comments with, "So handsome, devastatingly good-looking, and make his picture as large as possible." "Xu Zai is too perfect," one employee said. Others shrugged and said he offered little more than polished platitudes. "I've heard the same speech 3 times." The script was always the same. Chu attended school and completed military service in Singapore, then went to university in Britain. A chance encounter introduced him to the famous Russian investor Yuri Milner. During 5 years at DSD, he invested in Chinese companies including Xiaomi, Didi, and Alibaba. Then he received an offer from Harvard Business School and returned to campus despite Yuri's efforts to keep him. While Chu was at Harvard, Yuri made an enviably successful investment, and Chu expressed both admiration and regret. It was a little bit of a humble brag, but not in an annoying way. Naturally, he emphasized how he had met Zhang Yiming. The speech also included a small personal story about meeting his life partner, which made him more likable. Chu stood at the apex of the fleet's pyramid. As commander-in-chief, he had 2 crucial generals beneath him, Zhu Wenjie, who was Chinese, and Vanessa Pappas, who was American. Zhu led product and engineering. Pappas oversaw the regional general managers and focused her energy on localized operations. More plainly, Zhu managed most of the Chinese employees and Pappas most of the foreign employees. Above them, Chu used the elegance of his multiple identities to command and balance both groups. Consider first the left half of the fleet's organizational map. Zhu Wenjie, a dark-complexioned man with black-framed glasses, was a ByteDance veteran. He first reported to Yang Zhenyuan, head of the recommendation algorithm platform, and led Data IES, the interactive entertainment community. Shaped by ByteDance's culture, this senior technologist carried an air similar to Zhang Yiming's. At one internal seminar, he said he did not know how to drive because he thought it wasted too much time. He commuted by taxi. During the 90 minutes he spent traveling each day, Zhu sat in the back and read academic papers. Every 2 weeks, he could finish a respectable doctoral dissertation. Compared with ordinary papers, dissertations were more systematic and explanatory, English-language documents of more than 100 pages. Douyin propelled him a long way up ByteDance's managerial ladder. Before Douyin became a spectacular success, Zhu entered as a member of the centralized platform and led a team building its recommendation algorithms, enabling growth armed to the teeth. When Douyin exceeded 100 million daily active users, he earned ByteDance's highest performance rating, O for outstanding. The distinction was reserved for the very few people who made exceptional contributions to the company. Rumor had it that the year-end bonus could equal 100 months of salary, a mouth-watering sum whenever colleagues mentioned it. Zhu then volunteered to move into product, becoming CEO of Toutiao. Everyone knew Toutiao's growth had long stagnated and that Douyin's rise was even cannibalizing it. But the role served as a training ground, turning Zhu from a pure recommendation algorithm leader into an executive with both product and technical capabilities. In February 2021, carrying an aura of legend, he moved to TikTok. One level lower on the map, several key figures had either solid line or dotted line reporting relationships with Zhu. Head of Engineering Zhang Yiming, formerly head of Hulu China's data and advertising team, reported by solid line to Hong Dingkun, head of ByteDance's engineering platform, and by dotted line to Zhu. Head of recommendation algorithms, Su Jai, reported by solid line to Zhu. Head of product Tan Siki, who had worked at Huobai and Zhao Hongshu, reported by solid line to Zhu. Head of content style Wang Xiuding, reported by solid line to Zhu. Head of live streaming Wang Yinglei, who had founded a company and worked at Snapchat, reported by solid line to Han Shangyu, head of ByteDance's live streaming platform, and by dotted line to Zhu. Head of growth Liu Hanyu, formerly of Baidu and Tencent, reported by solid line to Zhao Qi, head of ByteDance's UG platform, and by dotted line to Zhu. During Zhu Jun's tenure, TikTok had two highly favored product leaders, Wang Yinglei, known as Adam, and Tan Siki. Wang had previously led strategy at TikTok, including country, strategy, and operational products such as content understanding and content tone. Tan led product features. ByteDance loved promoting young people. Wang and Tan represented the archetype, born in the 1990s, winners of the educational selection system, graduates of prestigious schools overseas, bright and quick-witted. Most importantly, they retained a sincere heart toward the company. They were also comparatively obedient. Wang Yinglei single-handedly built the country product manager team with more than 10 people to serve as a bridge. They stood between the China organization and local GMs, resolving divisions and emotions while carrying business targets. But the team resembled a transitional structure through which power was moving from China overseas. By the time Zhu Wenjia arrived, it existed in name only. Wang Yinglei now led TikTok live streaming, while Wang Xiuding inherited what remained of his operational products, content understanding and content style. Now consider the right half of the map. Papa's was a tall woman with short blonde hair and a formidable presence. Her aura made you think she was a Hollywood star. Strong-willed and meticulous, she was one of the few American professional managers who worked diligently enough to swallow the bitter fruit of a Chinese company's 996 schedule. ByteDance poached her from YouTube. Employees recalled an evening in the United States when darkness fell over a huge open-plan office capable of holding 100 or 200 people. Everyone went home. In the end, only 3 remained in the empty hall, 1 Chinese employee, Papa's, and a security guard. It was like that for almost 7 or 8 days. She led from the front, leaving at 9 or 10 at night, the lone Chinese employee said with feeling. Americans really don't watch the boss's face. The GM was still there, but everyone under her had gone home. Most of Papaz's direct reports were local GMs, who exercised authority in their regions. Pappas herself served as general manager for North America, the United States, Australia, and Canada. Rich Waterworth, the GM for Europe excluding Eastern Europe, was a powerfully built white man with black-framed glasses. At the end of 2020, he published an open letter in Britain's Evening Standard announcing that TikTok had exceeded 100 million monthly active users in Europe. Australia's GM, Lee Hunter, had worked at Google for more than a decade, served as YouTube's global head of brand, and been CEO of a company listed on the Australian Securities Exchange. Japan's GM, Yoichi Sato, was Japanese and had worked for many years at Google and Yahoo, making him a veteran witness to the evolution of Japanese marketing. Eastern Europe's GM, Chi Xiangqian, was one of the few Chinese GMs. He had worked in Russia and previously led Alibaba's culture and media business there. One person aboard TikTok's fleet was an exceptional case, Erich Anderson. An American with white hair and over half a century old, he served as ByteDance's global general counsel, steering legal affairs, government relations, and public relations. In effect, he inherited much of Liu Zhen's former territory after her departure in May 2020. Anderson was surrounded by an aura of mystery. One employee deliberately pointed at his name and told me, "He has a direct line to Zhang Yiming." Anderson did not immediately distinguish himself at ByteDance. The political storm gave him his opportunity. He helped ByteDance sue the US government and won Zhang's trust. Anderson had previously worked at Microsoft, climbing step by step from an ordinary lawyer into senior leadership and becoming chief intellectual property counsel. People who knew him said he was based in New York and combined authority with kindness, tending to understand and encourage employees. Compared with Liu Zhen, he brought greater experience from a global perspective. He had once helped an American company enter China. Now he was helping a Chinese company find ways to expand in the United States. He might serve as ballast when the great waves struck the fleet. TikTok's commercial head Blake Chandley, CSO Roland Cloutier, and others also reported to Chew. Before 2021, TikTok did not emphasize monetization measures such as ad load and focused single-mindedly on growth. After 2021, it accelerated commercialization, making Chandley increasingly important. His global sales team was the equivalent of Zhang Lidong's army in ByteDance China. Within this meticulously sculpted structure, ByteDance established additional mechanisms with painstaking care, both to balance human nature and to accelerate the operation of its enormous fleet. Over the previous 2 years, ByteDance increasingly emphasized dual solid line and dotted line reporting. The balance between centralized platforms and business lines was crucial. Take user growth. Europe's head of growth reported by solid line to Zhao Qi, head of the UG platform, and by dotted line to European GM Rich Waterworth. This arrangement could give Rich a sense of security. An analyst who had studied TikTok said the essence of ByteDance's global management was tight enough to control, loose enough to act. In India, for example, TikTok had at one point supported nearly every local language. Only local people could do this. It required both organizational tolerance and the ability to correct organizational errors. The fashion for PMOs also swept ByteDance during the previous 2 years. The company had expanded too quickly, producing departmental walls and communication failures. PMOs were the countermeasure. Project managers served specific initiatives, managing plans and schedules, and acting as fire captains during emergencies. They were like small motors aboard the fleet, lubricant for the main engine. After Zhu Wenjie arrived, he created a project management office and established more than 20 project groups. The PMO gave the company flexibility in commercial warfare. In April 2021, Kyushu's overseas products achieved a wave of growth by offering cash incentives for referral-driven acquisition. TikTok formed a special anti-Kyushu task force to support the UG platform. It watched App Store rankings country by country and spent money to carry out the order of chart suppression. TikTok gradually regained the initiative. Yet many apparently powerful managers aboard the fleet possessed only limited authority. Those who truly held power kept themselves continuously inside a subtle zone of safety. The company stratified information. Local GMs who appeared to command their own territories had no right to see whether their countries were classified S, A, B, C, or below, especially when the answer was B, C, or lower. The company certainly would not tell them how much budget other countries received. Such knowledge could breed resentment and obstruct management. ByteDance swept away barriers with one hand to keep the organization running smoothly, while planting barriers with the other to keep power in the hands of a very small number of people. Chapter 10: Plaid Shirts, Mooncakes, and the Universal Toutiao. Xu Zaichu was the fifth commander of the overseas fleet. Zhang Yiming always seemed to know what kind of person to elevate at each stage. The professional managers came one after another. Zhou Jingjin and Liu Xinhua made early mistakes for Zhang on the road to internationalization. Liu Zhen helped him build an initial network. Zhang Nan and Zhu Jun alternated in straightening out the product. Zhu, in particular, stitched together part of the cultural divide. Zhang had hoped Mayer's American identity would help settle matters with the U.S. government, but that plan collapsed. Papas temporarily filled the vacancy during the crisis. Employees had long grown used to senior executives coming and going, summarizing each departure by saying the person had completed a mission for that stage. Now the ship had passed into Chu's hands. At first, business staff worried that Chu understood only finance, strategy, and investment and lacked operational depth. After a while, however, they found him somewhat better than expected. Chu also had very high emotional intelligence. After joining ByteDance, he made a series of subtle changes. The most visible was his clothing. At Xiaomi, he had been a man of suits, carrying himself like a CFO. At ByteDance, he immediately dressed down and put on plaid shirts. One employee told me precisely that the change occurred in his second month. In his first month, the company expected him to do what he had done at Xiaomi and lead ByteDance into the temple of the capital markets. But in his second month, ByteDance abruptly announced that its listing plan had been canceled and postponed indefinitely. He immediately changed styles, like a chameleon. To fit Zhang Yiming's culture, several employees noticed, Chu quietly cleared out his Twitter and Instagram accounts. He was imitating and integrating with the executives here. His previous employer, Xiaomi founder Lei Jun, was warm-hearted and fond of public promotion. Zhang Yiming was the opposite. Chu understood the difference. He rarely expressed opinions on operational details, but the previous year he identified one major priority: depoliticization. Turn it into a pure entertainment product, said someone close to TikTok. Another issue he considered repeatedly was how to tune the organization further and reduce cultural shock within the global framework. Among Chinese companies, ByteDance had become the content platform employing the greatest number of foreigners. Its globalization differed from that of hardware companies such as Huawei and Xiaomi, which sent Chinese employees far from home and compensated them with generous salaries. Content products carry cultural attributes and regional genes, so ByteDance recruited large numbers of local employees. The result was continuing conflict between Chinese and foreign staff. Even a few boxes of mooncakes could trigger a dispute. At Mid-Autumn Festival, should mooncakes be given only to Chinese employees or to employees around the world equally? In the past, ByteDance chose the former. A group of foreign employees complained of unfair treatment. The company later grew wiser and circulated a survey in advance, letting overseas employees choose whether they wanted mooncakes. The approach seemed beyond criticism. It extended warmth while leaving room for individual choice. Unexpectedly, another group of employees, led by Americans, objected. This is spreading Chinese culture. The company later reassured them. Chinese people place greater weight on collectivism and are more willing to obey. Americans are taught to value the individual from childhood and possess a strong sense of personal agency. This forced TikTok, on its overseas campaign, both to fight monsters and to soothe people according to the distinctive culture and values of each country. The second task was entirely new to most Chinese companies. One employee said ByteDance's overseas staff, especially those in the United States, believed deep down that they worked for TikTok, not ByteDance. One sign was that their LinkedIn profiles generally listed TikTok alone and did not mention ByteDance. ByteDance therefore placed exceptional importance on managing overseas personnel. TikTok's China all-hands could sometimes be postponed for various reasons, but the US all-hands always took place on schedule. The company also assigned internal communications staff to each region. Questions from overseas employees often concerned corporate responsibility, human rights, gender equality, and racial equality. Communications staff had to coordinate and polish responses according to local sensibilities. To address the challenge of global management, Zhang Yiming added a new principle to ByteDance's cultural code in 2020: be diverse and inclusive. TikTok is an outstanding case of globalization, the chief analyst at a well-known brokerage told me. Many overseas users do not even know which country the company comes from. ByteDance's international business has no headquarters. News reports frequently said the company was considering a new global headquarters, but none ever materialized. It still hasn't been decided. Perhaps there will never be a headquarters, one employee said. Even Singapore, where Zhu Wenjia and important product and engineering staff were based, was not called headquarters. Like Chu's role as a human bridge, Singapore itself balanced Eastern and Western civilizations. Step by step, TikTok grew into an enormous virtual network whose nodes could no longer be seen, circling above the entire planet. By the numbers, TikTok had once struggled to catch Douyin. Just as it drew close, India abruptly banned it, reducing daily active users by more than 100 million. It took over a year for TikTok to catch up again. According to several sources, by the beginning of 2022, TikTok had exceeded 700 million daily active users and was still growing extremely fast. Douyin had seen little growth over the previous year and stood at around 670 million. TikTok had finally and comprehensively surpassed it. Together, the two versions of the product had more than 1.3 billion daily active users worldwide. TikTok had also overtaken Facebook in downloads to rank first among global social products. Organizationally, ByteDance was shifting from a centralized platform model toward business unit leadership. As it de-emphasized the platforms and strengthened BUs, Zhao Qi transferred responsibility for growth in mature domestic businesses to the individual units and personally retained only international growth. At the same time, he took over Pangle, ByteDance's advertising platform, and entered Zhang Lidong's monetization system. Even the leader of the department that spent the most money had begun doing commercialization. UG became a second-level department. Someone close to ByteDance's monetization organization believed this reflected both the current environment of cost reduction and efficiency and the evolution of TikTok's commercial stage. After crossing the most exciting inflection point in the four-stage commercial journey, TikTok no longer depended on the UG platform. Its growth flywheel could turn naturally, and the app had entered the final stage, accelerated monetization. It still had substantial room to commercialize. Foreign media reported that TikTok's revenue could reach $11 billion in 2022. The source above said ByteDance had an even more aggressive internal target somewhere between $11 billion and $20 billion. Its greatest risk remained geopolitics. Looking back, after the birth of Douyin and TikTok, ByteDance's workforce exploded from 3,000 to more than 130,000 people, including contractors, an increase of more than 40-fold. Its valuation rocketed from $11 billion to nearly $400 billion, almost 36 times greater. It had taken off from the squat building with a helicopter landing pad. A company that constantly preached the reduction of ego acquired a magnificent nickname, Yuxiao, Universal Toutiao, or the Cosmic ByteDance. In mid-2021, With Douyin and TikTok posting excellent numbers, ByteDance held a small celebration. A source said that during a report to American shareholders, staff from the president's office brought out a small cake with a single lit candle. Zhang Yiming disliked such conventional scenes, but he nevertheless leaned over and blew it out. After completing its enormous global expansion at high speed, Zhang stepped down as CEO and withdrew from frontline management at the end of 2021. ByteDance's current CEO, Liang Rubo, had been building companies with Zhang since their university dormitory days. He was an even more modest, reserved, and low-profile co-founder. An insider reminded me that Liang came from a technical background, which benefited ByteDance's global brand image. His English had improved greatly, and he could now converse fluently with foreigners. His accent was also considerably lighter than Zhang's. Finally, turn the clock back 12 years. Zhang Yiming and Liang Rubo had just founded their previous company, 99 Fang, and 2010 was its second year. That Christmas, Zhang watched the film that influenced a generation of mobile internet entrepreneurs, The Social Network, the biopic of Mark Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg, like Zhang, was born in the 1980s. In fact, he was 1 year younger. After the film, Zhang opened Douyin and typed a short review. The word that left the deepest impression on me in The Social Network was obsession. He gave the movie 4 stars. 1 year and 3 months later, Zhang founded ByteDance. For many years afterward, Facebook remained buried deep in his mind. Today, however, he no longer mentions the company nearly as often. Just as Zhang Yiming led TikTok into the waves and against the current, so it is in this world. If desire does not swallow you, perhaps you can swallow desire whole.